Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel where today we are going to be doing my November end of month wrap up. So we're going to take a look at everything that I read in the last 2 weeks of November, starting with Teach Me by Olivia Dade. So Teach Me is an adult contemporary romance where we're following our two main characters of Martin and Rose. Martin and Rose are both teachers, and Rose has been teaching at her school for about 15 years, I believe. Martin has been teaching for quite a while as well, but this is his first year at Rose's school. And Rose is determined to hate him because um, some of her favorite classes are given to Martin to teach, and she's also told that she's going to have to share her classroom with him. The big flaw with this plan, however, is that Martin is a huge cinnamon roll, and so she just quickly learns that instead of hating him, she's going to have to learn how to keep him at arm's length. And the story goes from there. So there are a lot of things that I really like about this romance, primarily that our main characters are older. They are in their 40s. And this romance feels like a romance between two 40-year-olds. And it's honestly, it's lovely. It is still intense and passionate. It's just much quieter. I really like that these characters are just so comfortable with who they are. They know their likes, their dislikes, their needs, and it's just really nice to watch. They also are really communicative with each other. And it's not that they don't have misunderstandings, because they absolutely do. They miscommunicate, they have misunderstandings, but they very quickly realize the issue and they come back together and they talk about it and they apologize. And I just really, really appreciated that. It felt so much more realistic to me. Additionally, like the main conflict in this book does center around the fact that they understand their own needs, and some of their needs are in opposition to each other, and they just don't know if they can make it work. And I really, really liked that. I did have an issue with the end resolution. Um, and it was mostly just that at the end, one of the characters decide that they do need to do this big public declaration of love because their partner needs it. Now, I have issue with this because I don't think that their partner actually needs it. I think that maybe the person doing the declaration feels is saying that the other person needs it, but actually that they need it. Um, like the person doing the declaration actually needs it to feel like they're fully committing. But that even with all of that, that's a little strange considering that up until this point, these characters have been so in touch with their feelings and who they are as people that it would be really strange for them to kind of overlook what they need and say, oh no, my partner needs it. I don't know. I felt a little weird about it. There's definitely an argument to be made that actually these characters, that this is very much in character and that it works with the story. I don't necessarily agree, but it obviously, like, I just wanted to point out that my opinion is not universal, so your mileage may vary. There are two things that you should absolutely know before going into this book. And the first is that these two characters are teacher and they talk teacher to each other, and it is very specifically the US school system. So if you don't have any interest in the US school system or teachers talking about lesson plans and that kind of thing, then you might want to pass this particular romance by. The other thing that you should know is that there are no other real side plots to this book. It is very much the romance, and that's it. Um, the only things we kind of get on the side, on the side that are kind of side plots are things where Rose and Martin are trying to kind of work through their own pasts so that they can be together in a relationship that is much more functional. But obviously, those side plots are like things that are needed for the romantic storyline. So it's just very much a romance and nothing else. So if you need something else, again, also maybe pass this one by. I found out that I do like to have side plots along. So even though there were a lot of things that I really liked about this particular book, I didn't fully connect with it. It was something that I probably honestly will forget. But I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. After that, I finished Abedins Gate by James S.A. Corey, the third book in the Expanse series. So, the Expanse series is an adult epic science fiction series, and in this particular book, there's an alien artifact out in space, and Mars and Earth and the Outer Planet Alliance is observing it to see if anything is going to happen with it, and then something happens with it. And they have to decide how to react, and hopefully they're reacting in the best possible way. And the story goes from there. I already have a full length review for this, so I'm not going to go too in depth. But overall, what I felt about this is that the quality was really high. It's just not generally how I like my books. So we got really great world building, but it wasn't necessarily about the things that I'm the most interested in. I think that the characters are really well done, especially given how many we have of them. These authors, it's a co-author duo, right? They have gotten really good about doing very clear, quick sketches of characters, which is commendable because this cast is huge. But it does mean that we don't go any super in depth on any character, which I do definitely miss. The plot structure is very much a Brandon Sanderson, or what I understand Neil Stephenson to be, where the beginning doesn't necessarily feel like there's a whole lot going on, but what the author is actually doing is putting in a lot of different things that will become important later on in the second half, which is exactly what happened. And the ending was truly fascinating and has such wide implications and could take this series in so many different interesting ways, directions. So I am still really interested in it, but like all of these things are not necessarily how I like my books to be. So overall, I think the quality is high. When I step back, I really like the plot and stuff that we got in here. It just wasn't necessarily the most enjoyable experience for me. However, when it came to rating it, I did actually go ahead and rate it according to quality because I walked in knowing a lot of these things were not necessarily to my personal taste. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. And then I picked up Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellafleur. And so this is an adult contemporary romance. And in it, we're following our 2 main characters of Darcy and Elle. And basically, they are they go on a disastrous blind date together. And afterwards, for various reasons, they go ahead and decide to just fake date. Darcy would like her brother to get off her back about her romantic relationship, and Elle would like to be seen as being in a stable relationship. And of course, fake dating, that's always code for, and then they fall in love. And then the story goes from there. So this was really hit or miss for me on the various elements. So part of the problem is at the beginning of this book, like the first 75-ish pages, we're trying really hard to put in nods to Pride and Prejudice in a way that I think interfered with being able to really set up these characters in any kind of a meaningful way. It was also interfering with some of the setup of like just the story in general. So the whole thing just didn't feel quite like it meshed properly in the beginning. After we dropped all of the nods to Pride and Prejudice, the story definitely settled in and it just got so much better. I will say also, unfortunately, I did not actually care about this romantic relationship at all, which is weird because I actually like both of the characters quite a bit. Like, I was invested in these characters, but I was not invested in their romance. And part of it was just because they could name good qualities about each other. Like, for example, Darcy knew why she like what was good about Elle, but didn't really ever contemplate like what kind of positive effect Elle was having on her and her life. And so it felt very strange because to me, without that piece of it, it just felt like, okay, but you're recognizing the other person has good qualities, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to be in a romantic relationship with them. You can just recognize that they're a person with good qualities. So that didn't quite work for me. Like I said, I was super invested in these characters though, so it was a little bit of a strange feeling to know that I just did not care about them getting together in the end. Um, and I will also say, unfortunately, with this book, there are some pacing issues. Really, it could have they could have cut out 50 pages and it would have been so much better. So, yeah, I mean, there were aspects of this that were really good, but I think there was just too much going on that was just didn't quite work. And so I ended up giving this 3.25 stars. I will continue with this series though, because I did like the characters so much and I want to see if maybe the writing craft improves over time. And then I picked up Protect the Prince by Jennifer Estep, the second book in the Crown of Shards trilogy. So, the Crown of Shards trilogy is an adult epic fantasy trilogy where we are following our main character of Everly. And in the first book, Everly is living at the castle and she's like 17th in line for the throne until one day the crown princess decides to murder everybody that is royal so that she can take the throne unchallenged. Unbeknownst to everybody, Everly manages to survive this massacre and she leaves the castle. In this second book, she has come back to the castle and she is trying to cement her place in the political structure. And her first major task that she has to do is to travel to a neighboring kingdom to secure some kind of treaty with them. However, this kingdom hates Everly and hates Everly's kingdom because their ambassador and their crown prince were also at this massacre and were also killed. And so Everly has her work cut out for her. I really liked this book in many ways, but I did not like it as much as I liked the first one. And the reason is actually just that the primary storyline for this particular book was a little bit weaker, was a little bit thin, and that extra like room for plot was taken up with a romantic storyline, which I just did not enjoy. I actually like the two people involved in this romance. I like them as a couple and everything. It's just that how the romantic storyline was written did not work for me. I thought it was a little bit over the top into the dramatics, and it was repetitive, and it contained a trope that I really didn't like. I really don't like, which is the I'm going to be unkind to you to push you away for your own good, and I'm just not going to tell you why I'm doing these things. It's just not one that I particularly like. I don't see it executed very well very often. So I really didn't like that part of it. And because it was so much more prominent in this book than in the first book, it meant that I never was able to get swept away in the story in the same way that I did with the first book. And so because I wasn't swept away, I was able to see much more of the flaws in in the writing, in the story. So, I mean, okay, like, look, I keep saying this, but basically, these books, they're not groundbreaking. They're not masterpieces of literature. They're fun, and that's okay. I'm okay with them having these flaws because they're fun. However, again, like I noticed so many more because I couldn't quite get into this this book. And so like I was able to guess the antagonist really early on. And it was supposed to be this big surprise and I was just like, but I'm not surprised. I was able to notice just how thin the main plot kind of was. And just generally like it just didn't quite work for me in the same way that the first book did, which is honestly a little bit sad. Now, what I will say is I am going to continue with this trilogy. I'm actually very excited to continue with this trilogy because, for the most part, the romance got more or less wrapped up at the end of this one. So I think that going forward, we're not going to have the same problems. And so I'm hoping that the third book will return to just a fun story that I can get swept away by. But I ended up giving this one 3.75 stars. And then lastly, I picked up Accidentally Engaged by Farah Heron. So this is an adult contemporary romance where we're following our main characters of Rena and Nadim. And so Rena is living in this apartment building and she meets her new neighbor who is completely hot. And it turns out to be Nadim, the person that her dad just hired and is hoping that Rena will one day marry. Rena is having none of this. She does not want anything to do with Nadim until she decides that she wants to enter this cooking competition, and it requires the contestants to be part of a couple. And so she ends up asking Nadim to pose as her fiance, and the story goes from there. So, I DNF'd this. I DNF'd it around 90 pages, and there were three things that were kind of working together to make it just not quite an enjoyable experience. And the first is that I just didn't really like the writing style. I don't think it was bad. I think it was just okay. It's not how it, like the right. It was both how the sentences were put together, and also like how characters were introduced, how situations were introduced. Like I said, not bad. It's just not. It was not good either. Additionally, we met Rena's family, and I don't like them. Well, it wasn't so much that I don't like them. It's Rena and Nadim are of Indian descent, and there is definitely that filial piety cultural aspect to it, which generally, like, I'm completely fine with. This is not a culture I grew up with, and honestly, my personality would not really agree with this particular cultural aspect either, but it's okay. Like, I'm generally just fine. I accept that, like, the main characters are going to make decisions that are different than what I would make, but it generally makes sense within the culture that they're part of. And again, totally fine. There are times that I run into where I do struggle with it a lot more, and within like the first 10 pages I knew that this book was going to be kind of writing the line. And so it was one of those things where if I liked the characters and everything, it would probably be just fine. But if things didn't get better, like with everything else, it might become a problem. And then I got to page 90, and I kind of pulled back and asked myself, do I like this book? And what I came up with is the writing hasn't gotten better. We're still having, like, I'm still having some issues with Rena and how Rena is interacting with her family. And I don't actually like any of these characters. I don't hate them, but I am fairly indifferent to all of them. And so I decided that even though this isn't a bad book, I'm just not enjoying it. And so I went ahead and DNF'd it, which was unfortunate because I had almost gotten out of November without DNFing a single book. And then it's like literally at 11:30 on November 30th, I DNF'd this one. It's okay, but maybe next year I'll have a month where I don't actually DNF anything. But yeah, that is everything that I read and DNF'd in the last 2 weeks. If you are interested on how the points shook out, we're going to get into that next. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I do assign points to the books that I read, basically giving myself more points if they fulfill various goals that I'm trying to accomplish. So for Teach Me, I ended up getting 1 point. For Abedins Gate, I got 2 points because it's a book in the middle of a series that I'm in the middle of. Written in the Stars gave me 1 point. Protect the Prince gave me 2 points because it's a book in a series that I'm in the middle of. And then Accidentally Engaged, I had to figure out what I was going to do with this because it is a DNF. And I decided to go ahead and give myself 1 point because I did make it to 90 pages. I really did try. And so when that happens, I'm much more likely to just give myself a point to encourage myself to continue to read things that I'm just not quite sure about. So that brings my total up to 7 for the last 2 weeks, which means that for November, I got a total of 14 points, which means that now I'm at 29 points total for the quarter, which is a little bit behind where I wanted to be, but we'll just see how things shake out in December. But that is it. If you have any thoughts or feelings about anything, any of the things that I read or DNF'd in these last 2 weeks, please leave me a comment down below. But that is all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!